I walked into the conference room, breath steady, heart a metronome. The digital projector whirred to life, illuminating the crisp slides of my pitch. But the breath caught in my throat when I saw it. The glaring absence of my name. No acknowledgement, no seat for me at this table draped in silence, as if I had vanished entirely. My mind raced, grappling with the absurdity, the betrayal. Yet rage didn't bloom. It flickered, cold and controlled. Let them forget, I thought. I won't. The years I spent, sacrificing weekends, pouring my essence into this company, unraveled in that moment, erased with keystrokes, as if I were nothing but a ghost haunting the digital corridors of their ambitions. I held my tongue. A scene was unnecessary. My vengeance would not scream. It would whisper through the cracks of their arrogance. I chose to embody restraint. Silence would become my weapon, and I would bide my time. Let them bask in their illusion of dominance while I prepared to unearth my own legacy. The name they tried to erase would become their competition. A specter of purpose lurking just beyond their grasp, waiting to strike. I spent years carving my name into the fabric of that company, giving my time like currency, watching milestones slip away, birthdays missed, anniversaries forgotten, my life's narrative woven into a tapestry only I could see. Now, all of it vanished with a few careless keystrokes, my legacy reduced to 0 bytes in a digital purgatory. The depth of the betrayal stirred something dark within as I stood at the edge of that conference room, a ghost haunting my own intentions. Then, I watched as a fresh face received praise for the client I had single-handedly secured. The sickening contrast of their joy against my absence was a wound that bled without blood. But I wouldn't let anguish consume me. Instead, it crystallized my resolve. I embraced the quiet, transformed pain into clarity, a laser focus forging a new self from the ashes of what they thought they could erase. They will know my absence in time. Each second spent observing their arrogance only tightened the vice around my feelings, sharpening my mind. Underneath the surface of my indifference, I nurtured a powerful truth. Silence could build an empire. I was no longer tethered to recognition. I was recalibrating my compass toward domination. I slipped my resignation letter into the HR box, a simple act shrouded in silence. Nothing more than a crisp sheet of paper, yet it felt like a seismic shift. I walked through the familiar halls, my presence now a whisper of a ghost amidst the chaos of the living. I noted the empty desk where my name once adorned the plaque, the avalanche of folders that would erase any trace of my existence. Their arrogance blinded them to my resolve. I paused at my old office, eyes lingering on the barren wall, devoid of identity. A single sticky note caught my attention, and I reached up to leave it behind, inscribing, "The person you erased remembers everything." That little message was my echo, a reminder that my existence would not be forgotten, a promise that this was merely the end of one act. My evenings now brimmed with purpose. I surrounded myself with blueprints and contracts, illuminated only by the faint glow of my computer screen. I built my vision in the darkness, each click a step toward the crown they thought they could tarnish. No fanfare, no social media unveilings, just shadows moving along the path I created alone, a path leading straight into their territory. I reached out to former clients, my name slipping through hushed conversations, rekindling old alliances unnoticed. Each new contact, each revived connection felt like a quiet knife in their back, barely perceptible, but devastating nonetheless. I measured my words carefully, letting my intentions remain veiled, knowing all too well that in this world, silence would become the loudest of weapons. Let them underestimate me, I thought, allowing the corners of my mouth to tighten into a semblance of a smile. They believed I could be neglected, erased, a casualty of their dismissive disregard. But they didn't know that in this silence, I found my voice. In the shadows, I discovered the strength I had never wielded before. I became focused, an architect of my own destiny, dismantling the obstacles they placed before me while waiting patiently for the right moment to strike back. Calculating and precise, my preparations remained unnoticed, allowing me to become a specter of ambition, a rival forming just beyond their grasp. In the stillness of my new home office, I plotted the foundation of a company entirely my own, each blueprint a testament to quiet defiance. Soft light glowed from the screen in the dark, illuminating my lone figure as I navigated contracts and vision statements, each document infused with the resolve of a ghost who had not yet revealed himself. No press releases, no LinkedIn announcements, just meticulous prep work concealed in the shadows. A notification chimed. It was from a former client. "Where did you go?" the message read, punctuated by hesitant curiosity. "The new team isn't the same." I felt an electric thrill, the first taste of leverage, validation coursing through me like an elixir. They fed my hunger. Despite the satisfaction, I remained impassive, cloaked in frustration turned ambition. I savored the way their attention gravitated toward me, inquiring while remaining unaware of my intent. Every word contributing to my ascent was a delicate brushstroke in a larger, unseen picture. They could not fathom that the absence they crafted had transformed into something formidable. I replied with a hint of mystery, planting the seeds of my return without revealing my hand. Each interaction was a weighted pause, a pause before the storm. I learned to speak in shadows, knowing that the longer my voice remained unheard, the larger the impact would be when it finally emerged. Like a predator waiting in the underbrush, resolving to strike when their guard was down. My plans were anchored in patience, and I shrugged off the itch of impatience. Day by day, I studied them, the internal rot eating away at the core of their complacency, manifesting as egos clashing, culture dissolving. I envisioned each misfortune they stumbled upon, knowing their flashy expansion was a house of cards ready to crumble. Clarity washed over me. Slowly, I was no longer the forgotten. I was the architect of my own resurgence, preparing for a collision course they couldn't foresee. I could almost taste it. The sweetness of my revenge lay in the timing. As the gears of fate began to turn, I calculated every moment, riding the tension with controlled breath. Each night deepened my resolve, and I whispered promises into the still air. I would be more than a rival. I would become the premise of their downfall. I remained a watchful shadow, absorbing the disarray that enveloped my former company. The glossy veneer, touted in their press releases, shimmered with promises they now failed to deliver. I observed as egos clashed in boardrooms, the air thick with tension and discontent. Leaders too proud to acknowledge the cracks forming beneath their feet. Culture waned as employees exchanged wary glances over stagnant coffee, their collective spirit eroded. Their announcement of a grand expansion, a spectacle designed to dazzle the market and distract from their internal rot. Fangs of anticipation gripped my resolve. I could decipher the fragility in their bluster. A house built of sand. No infrastructure to support their lofty claims. I allowed the burgeoning flutter of glee to settle, resisting the urge to laugh out loud. patience clothed me like armor. I understood that revenge isn't built on hasty choices, but on calculated moves. Each day was a lesson in restraint, forcing me to wait, to observe, to keep my head down and my heart steady. Timing was my ally, and the thrill of their impending downfall simmered within me like a distant storm, gathering strength. I found comfort in knowing they couldn't perceive the predator lurking just behind their perception, directing the narrative from afar. Revenge isn't rage, it's timing, I reminded myself, tightening my grip on the reins of my ambition. I would not let joy cloud my strategy, no. There would be a crescendo, a moment when their astonishment would hit hard, catching them off guard. I had become adept at waiting, letting their arrogance build until it toppled over into chaos. In their oblivion, they cultivated the very weeds that would ensnare them. I stood by, ready to weave my own design into the sprawling tapestry they thought they controlled. In the dark, where intentions roamed free, I meticulously plotted the quiet revolution, a comeback they wouldn't know to fear until they saw it on the horizon. The weight of the world, burdened with their ignorance, bore down heavily, but I embraced the silence, for in it lay my triumph. I watched the sunrise paint my office in hues of orange and gray, a conflict mirroring the chaos festering within my plans. The launch was a calculated move, sleek and anticipatory. Everything fell into place as my company emerged, lean, agile, and laser-focused. I secured contracts with former allies, quietly undermining their new leadership as I siphoned talent they'd once deemed essential. But then, a slip. A call from an unscheduled source pierced the calm. Jennifer, an old colleague turned friend, needed to talk. The urgency in her voice tethered urgency in my chest. "They're suspicious. There are whispers about your new firm," she confided. "They think you're somehow linked to those contracts." I remained still, the phone pressed against my ear, heart steady like a metronome. They saw me. They knew I existed, and that fear tugged at the edges of my carefully woven strategy. My plans were built for silence. The shadows were supposed to engulf me, not illuminate my return. I gripped the edge of the desk, grounding myself. In moments of disruption, recalibration was vital. I had to recalibrate. "Keep your distance. Share nothing," I instructed, each word methodical, a precision cut to maintain control. "They've underestimated me. Let them think I'm an echo from the past." I took a deep breath, the cool air sharpening my resolve. In the quiet of dawn, I began to twist this surprise into an advantage. If they suspected me, then they were already reeling. I could choose misdirection, let them chase ghosts while I built my foundation deeper, stronger. I shifted my focus back to the blueprint before me, images of my firm dancing with ambition. Every keystroke now carried the weight of this new knowledge. I would layer my defenses. I'd strengthen my network. They would not see the ripples until the waves crashed upon their shores. Let them search for shadows while I sculpted the reality they feared. I embraced the tension and transformed it into steel, a blade waiting to cut through their complacency. They thought they buried me shallow. I deepened the chasm, ensuring I struck hard, untraceable, relentless in pursuit. The world was a chess game, and I had a new strategy. I wasn't just returning to reclaim a past. I was rewriting the narrative, and this unexpected turn only made the plot richer. They would feel the pressure build as I moved pieces into play, tightening my grip on both their ambition and my own mission. This was recalibration at its finest, a transformation of panic into precision, like a knife honed to a fine edge. The whispers of concern became the very fabric of my retaliation. I melted into the shadows, a specter with purpose, ready to extinguish whatever light they dared to shine on my resurgence. The industry event buzzed with energy, filled with bright lights and eager faces. Yet for me, it was a stage set for a reckoning. I stood at the back, a shadow in tailored gray, watching as they positioned themselves around the newly unveiled presentation. Flashes of my old life flickered like a distant film reel. The claps, the accolades, the moments now stained by erasure. The moment their logo faded and mine illuminated the screen, a calculated move, a subtle shift of power, tension coiled in the air, palpable and electric. I held my breath. This was not merely a presentation, it was my return, the unveiling of a meticulously crafted empire, unseen yet undeniable. As they exchanged glances, confusion morphing into unease, I leaned into my control, a predator poised, deceptively calm. Their biggest client had crossed over, a statement dripping with irony. The same client I once built from the ground up, now entwined with the name they attempted to erase. I absorbed their discomfort, savoring the ebb of their confidence as my logo pulsed on the screen, a beacon of what they lost. The stench of betrayal hung heavy in the air, unspoken but crystal clear. It wasn't victory I sought, it was recognition, a reminder that silence had borne the loudest threats. I didn't smile. There was no gloat, no burst of triumph. Instead, I studied their faces, some furrowed in disbelief, others painted with anger, as if they were realizing that this moment was a mirror, reflecting their errors back at them. They had failed to see the flame I had cultivated while shrouded in darkness, a fire that was now consuming the foundation of their pride. They thought they had buried me, stripped me of my identity. But here I was, the figure that haunted their corridors now stepping into the light, fully formed and unyielding. The game had shifted. The board was mine. I was not a whisper of revenge. I was a crescendo rising, a masterfully orchestrated betrayal woven through silence and strategy. My heart did not race. There was no adrenaline to cloud my clarity. This was mastery. Everything I envisioned had converged into this single moment. The molecules of fate colliding, unshackled potential exploding in slow motion. They had crafted the very condition of my return, unleashing a force they could not anticipate. Now you see what you tried to erase, I thought, relishing the weight of my triumph as their discomfort solidified into a fateful acknowledgement. I let it wash over me, a cold wave of satisfaction crashing against the shores of my resolve. The hush drowning out their disarray was a beautiful lullaby, and I surrendered to it without hesitation. With every calculated detail laid bare on that screen, every exiled corner of my ambition illuminated, I felt the world shift. I would not demand recognition. I would reclaim it. Through restraint and cunning, I had built more than a business. I had constructed a legacy forged in the chaos they failed to comprehend. They wandered in their own shadows, searching for the remnants of the leadership that had left. Meanwhile, I embraced the new dawn, knowing that true power did not scurry beneath the spotlight. It lurked in the periphery and danced with purpose. Each tick of the clock marked the failure of their empire, and every heartbeat of mine echoed the quiet, deliberate mastery of fate. In that moment of stillness, I not only regained my identity, but reshaped the narrative. Each pulse of my heart reaffirmed that revenge wasn't simply an act of emotional catharsis. It was a meticulous plan executed with precision. I wasn't just their competition. I was the inevitable reckoning they had conjured through their arrogance. The path of their downfall lay illuminated before me, and I moved forward, unbroken, steady, and resolute. The whispers of discontent became palpable, curling through the sterile halls of my former company like smoke from a dying fire. I observed them from a distance, masked by the cloak of anonymity. The restructuring announcements rolled out like clockwork, aimed at mending fractures they couldn't admit existed. Yet, even from afar, I could sense their panic brewing beneath the glossy facade. Their best clients had vanished into the void I created, drifting toward a beacon of integrity. Talents, once loyal defenders of a dilapidated empire, were slipping through their fingers, lured by the promise of renewal I offered. A grim satisfaction settled in my core. I had stitched the seams of their descent without uttering a word. Reacting with haste was for the desperate. I had no desire to be a mere shadow in their twilight. I was the storm surge looming just beyond the horizon, licking at the edges of their complacency, waiting for the moment to break the dam. The notifications echoed on my phone, a stray message from a recruiter probing into former colleagues, unwittingly inviting me back into the fold as the architect of recovery. They didn't even know it was me. You needed a scapegoat, I thought, a smirk nearly breaking my stoic demeanor. But what you created was a rival with motive. Their minds were clouded by arrogance, lost in a labyrinth of their own making, paths forged of ego and neglect. My pulse steadied, a silent reminder that this was only the beginning. I had chosen distance as my ally, stepping back from industry expos and public debates, allowing my work to speak for itself while they floundered under the weight of their mistakes. Every moment spent in their missteps sharpened the blade of my ambition. The storm conjured in their boardroom was of my design. I reveled in the orchestrated chaos, standing still through the maelstrom, poised and patient. I didn't long for vindication. I didn't desire their acknowledgement. I felt no nostalgia for the paths I once walked with them. I had transcended that version of myself, emerging as a harbinger of their undoing. They could sense the undercurrents shifting, that anxiety clawing its way to the surface. But I was the one in control. As I sat back, considering my next moves, I knew they were lurching, fumbling to patch what had become a breach. They were unaware that the very wounds they battled were self-inflicted. Each failure I witnessed only served to illuminate their blind spots. Keep your course, I instructed myself, heart steady, mind clear. I was not merely a survivor. I was a predator circling its prey, measuring my strikes, knowing that the time to plunge my fangs in was drawing closer. The emperor they quaked over was transforming into the classic vigilante, but my cloak was patience, and vengeance was my banner. In this silent pursuit, I wielded clarity like a sword. Each pulse of ambition heightened my senses, ready to strike as soon as the moment was ripe. They had unleashed a darkness upon themselves, thinking they could build a fortress without understanding the architect's role. They had misplaced me entirely. As the chaos unfolded within their walls, I remained their unseen architect, waiting for the collapse, poised to rise from the ashes and stake my claim. The blade hovered silently, and it was time for the storm. They would feel its power soon enough. No fortress withstands the storm forever. I stood at the edge of my carefully constructed empire, watching the ripples continue to form in the waters of their discontent. As they fumbled, lost in the haze of their own decisions, I remained in the shadows, an architect unseen, details honed to precision. With each passing day, their descent deepened, a slow-motion calamity unfolding that showcased the folly of their arrogance. My phone buzzed at my side, a message from an old confidant within their ranks. Crisis meeting tomorrow. Things are falling apart. The sentiment ignited a quiet satisfaction within me. They danced in chaos, unaware that the tempest was of their own design, one I had set into motion with the softest of nudges. Distance had become my greatest ally, allowing me to weave strategic strands without exposing myself. I exhaled slowly, like a sniper's breath before the trigger, pillow soft but electric with focus. My former boss had requested a meeting, seeking clarity, perhaps a path to salvation. I declined, a decision emblematic of my evolution. They would not pull me back into their storm. I was the force preparing to sunder it. True power doesn't chase the faint echoes of validation or vengeance. It remains resolutely detached, summoning alternatives that become impossible to resist. I took nothing from them, I mused, but I became something undeniable. The final piece of my plan clicked into place, a silence that reverberated in every corner of my mind. They thought they had erased me, left only a ghost in a digital purgatory. Yet here I was, unbroken and recalibrated, waiting for the moment I could pull back the curtain on my quiet ambition with the kind of conviction that makes giants fall. With resolve settling in, I turned my gaze toward the horizon, knowing that the storm I had quietly orchestrated was about to unleash its fury. No one yet sensed the power I held. They had become so enmeshed in their own downfall, they wouldn't recognize the reckoning until it was too late. The silence hummed with potential, thrumming through me like a promise. I reveled in the stillness before impact, in the mastery of my calculated restraint. Vengeance wasn't a roar. It was a whisper that would soon crescendo into a symphony of resolution. The world would discover what lies behind the veil of patience, and oh, how they would feel the depths of that revelation when it struck, swift, quiet, and utterly transformative. The game had always been mine. It was a quiet morning when the first cracks in their empire made themselves known. Whispers grew louder, darting through the sterile corridors like frightened birds seeking refuge. I watched from the shadows, an architect of their unraveling, calculating every shift and tremor they could no longer ignore. Their glossy press releases, heralding new expansions and lofty ambitions, served as nothing more than a fragile facade, a titanic structure teetering on the edge of chaos. Crisis meeting tomorrow, a message from a confidant revealed, the words dripping with delicious irony. Their internal turmoil, a byproduct of my strategic silence, swelled like a tide. I relished the thought of their faces when reality finally pierced their denial. Come morning, priorities would shift, and none would fill the void I had left. They wouldn't see it coming. Then came the unexpected missive, a former boss reaching out through an anonymous recruiter, seeking a lifeline. I declined without hesitation, a quiet defiance echoing in my decision. They had hoped I could serve as a remedy to their self-inflicted wounds, unaware that I was instead the architect of their doom. In their desperation, they required acknowledgement, yet I understood true power lay within the restrained ego. I didn't want their validation. I had surpassed the boy they once dismissed. I had constructed something undeniable, a rival brought forth from the ashes of abandonment. My pulse steadied. I was hidden within layers of patience, ready to unveil a narrative that would ripple through their existence. Their incompetence brewed beneath the surface. I could feel it, like a storm gathering intensity. While they hurried to recalibrate, I maneuvered through their clutches like a shadow, the architect of my own resurgence. I decorated my new empire with mentorship programs and anti-toxic leadership models, each decision blooming from the harsh lessons I had learned at their hands. I was not simply a competitor. I was a living testament to resilience, embodying everything they had failed to uphold. A reporter called, curious about my company's ethical foundations. I replied with laser precision, I lived through the opposite. The words settled like a stone thrown into still water, provoking ripples of contemplation, and for a moment, I imagined their faces when confronted with the truth. How my journey would become their wake-up call. As those ripples expanded, my rivals stumbled blindly through their disarray. I could almost hear the splintering glass beneath their calculated steps, their balance tipping as they grasped to maintain an image long crumbled. I became a specter of certainty among their chaos, a quiet fire igniting where their smokescreens had once obscured sight. They thought their silence would shield them, but mine became the weapon they could not withstand. Every moment they faltered was a quiet victory for me, an emotion unsung yet undeniably satisfying. One by one, former allies crossed over. The deserted halls of their empire echoed with isolation as loyalty parted ways with toxic leadership. I remained their unrecognized opposition, the embodiment of the choices they made in ignorance. With every misstep they took, I stood poised, a carefully arranged chess piece in a game they didn't know they were losing. They never saw me coming, nor could they comprehend the depth of their incompetence. My focus deepened. I was past the point of gloating. My satisfaction lay in witnessing their reckoning unfold. Soon, the closed doors of their crisis meeting would give way to revelation. I watched the clock, counting the seconds until chaos erupted and their world came crashing down. All those years, they thought they were erasing my existence, only nurtured a rival growing in the shadows. A legacy forged from predation and patience. And when they finally turned to look for me, they would see nothing but the void they created. In that moment, I felt a calm settle over me. This was not merely revenge, but redefinition. There was beauty in the silence of my victory as I learned to relish the art of their downfall, devoid of any celebratory drumroll. In that stillness, it was clear. I did not merely survive their erasure. I had written a legacy so profound they could never hope to scrub it clean. Sitting alone in the subdued glow of my home office, I allowed my gaze to drift to a framed note clinging to the wall. Build the thing they said you couldn't. The words, once a whisper of aspiration, now resonated with the weight of my journey. It had been a long path littered with the wreckage of what once was. A company, a facade of family, a lie wrapped in professionalism. And there, outside of the shadows I crafted, an orange sun was emerging on a new horizon, illuminating possibilities untold. But the sunset behind me caught my eye as I shifted my thoughts to them. Just hours earlier, I learned that the last vestiges of their C-suite had vanished. No fanfare, no announcement, simply gone. The echoes of their leadership, which once loomed so large, now faded into the background of my new beginning. My hand tightened around the arm of my chair, a flood of muted satisfaction bubbling beneath my surface. Yet, I felt no triumph. There was no victory lap to run, no crowning moment to herald. This was merely the conclusion of a single chapter in a narrative neither of us had anticipated. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to breathe, to simply exist in the lingering silence they left behind. I stood, the chill of the air wrapping around me, a stark reminder of the journey I had just traversed. With each confident step toward the exit, I felt the weight of my choices settle into my bones, heavy yet liberating. I had not sought vengeance in its loudest form. My desire was far simpler. It was the proving ground of my own existence that had propelled me into the light, a reclamation of my name against a tide that tried to erase it. I'd become a ghost, no longer seeking revenge, but rather nurturing a legacy built on the ashes of their disdain. Stepping out into the open air felt like a rebirth. The sight of an empty road stretched before me, a reminder of the distance I had traveled away from their chains. The sound of my footsteps was drowned out by the soft rustle of leaves, the past whispering its final goodbye. Closure wrapped around me, settling comfortably as I walked away from their world, leaving behind the labyrinth of memories that once haunted me. In that quiet resolve, I recognized something deeper. They had believed their erasure was an end, a power move to silence me. In truth, it had only forged a path I was meant to walk, a path away from them, toward my own horizon. Revenge, it turned out, was not an act of malice. It had given rise to clarity, to purpose, to me. And as I moved forward, I reflected on that truth. Sometimes, being forgotten can bring forth a legacy written in ink so thick they would never scrub it clean. This wasn't the end. It was merely the beginning of something far greater. With each breath I took, I crafted my own story, unburdened by the weight of theirs. The chapter closed softly behind me as I stepped into the future, shaped by the choices I had made, the decisions I had sown in silence. A flicker of the past lingered at the edges of my mind, but it faded with each determined step. I was not a name lost to time. I was the architect of my destiny, and it was time I began to walk it unabashedly. No longer a ghost, I was reborn in the very space they sought to obliterate.